They called him Superman. Tyler Helinski was a sophomore quarterback at Washington State University. Even though he was a popular student and seemed to be a positive and upbeat kid, tragically he killed himself in January of 2018. Tyler never asked for help, his father told Sports Illustrated. Even though on the surface it appeared Tyler had everything a college student could have possibly wanted, he was suffering in the shadows of his own mind with depression. Unfortunately, Tyler isn't alone in his suffering. I'm BJ Milliken, and this is A Deadly Mentality, the Rise of Mental Illness in Student Athletes. This is an important topic for me because I work so closely with many of our student athletes here at Samford University. As someone who wants to go into athletic administration, I take it very seriously because our student athletes often don't ask for help, and many people assume that they don't need it. After all, many appear like they're Superman. In 2019, the NCAA indicates that there were 460,000 student athletes participating in 24 sponsored sports at more than 1,260 member institutions. Research shows that between 15.6% and 21% of those 460,000 have experienced depression. On the low end, that breaks down to 71,760 student athletes. It's enough to completely fill up Legion Field. As the money rolls in for big-time college athletics, more and more pressure is placed on these student athletes, leading to a rapidly increasing problem of mental illness, and in extreme cases, suicide. Research actually shows that student athletes suffer from a higher level of depression and mental illness than do their non-athlete counterparts. I mean, think about it. They have the normal stressors of the college experience, classes, grades, finals, papers, relationships. Then add early morning workouts, strict dietary regimens, practice sessions, game day travel, film sessions. That doesn't even factor in the performance anxiety that many suffer. That's a big problem, especially when my research showed that student athletes are less likely to admit to having behavioral health issues. So what can be done? Even though many schools are rolling in the money, some smaller schools like Samford can barely afford to fund some of our non-revenue generating sports. The money simply isn't there. And one of the tenets of the NCAA is to protect young people from the dangerous and exploitive athletic practices of the time. Well, the time is now. Suck it up. Quitting's not an option. If you've played sports, you've probably heard some form of those phrases before. It's the athlete's mentality, after all. Mental toughness, playing through pain, they're virtues in the sports world. And this is exactly the type of mentality which often leads student athletes to refuse to admit their mental struggles. This is just one of the barriers that exist in getting them the help that they so desperately need. There's also the problem of lack of on-campus resources. At a university the size of Samford, there's no way we can hire a full-time clinical psychologist specifically for student athletes. A survey recently indicated that only 38.3% of schools ranging from Division I to Division III employed a clinical psychologist in a full or part-time capacity. So who does a student athlete turn to if they do need to seek help? If a psychiatrist isn't available on campus, that leaves athletic trainers and coaches. The problem now becomes proper training and screening instruments, which many schools simply don't have. The NCAA in 2016 provided member schools with a guide outlining best practices in dealing with mental health issues. A big move, which showed how important they know that the problem is. But it doesn't go far enough. Their recommendations are great, but as we've already discussed, many smaller schools simply can't afford the resources they suggest. To make matters worse, only 40% of NCAA Division I schools have access to screening instruments to assess student athletes for mental health issues. Matt Price, the athletics trainer at Samford, gave me a glimpse at what they're dealing with. He says, "I would love to be able to fund more access and resources for our student athletes, but it just isn't feasible right now. The Power 5 schools hire their own sports psychologists, and they are in the athletic training rooms every day and around for all practices and events." That's a big problem. There isn't an NCAA-wide standard for screening. And even if there were, many schools can't make it happen financially. So now it's time to make some halftime adjustments. In the first half, we saw the problem. Mental health issues are on the rise among student athletes. Many schools don't have the resources to tackle these problems, and there's really no NCAA-wide standard like there are on issues like concussions. So let's talk about some of the potential fixes. Schools must make use of their PPEs. A PPE is a pre-performance exam. Student athletes take these once a year in preparation for their season. A big step towards making mental health a priority would be adding a mental health screening as a required part of the PPE. Currently, there is no standard and validated instrument to make this exam the same at each institution. The good news is that the NCAA is attempting to create a standard for screening by 2021. Spotting issues early is a key for preventing major mental health challenges down the road. So the PPE, while a good step, ultimately isn't enough. I mean, if your doctor only sees you once a year, there are bound to be things he misses. If there isn't a physical presence on campus every day, these PPE exams can only go so far. Another possible fix is awareness. Are student athletes aware of the resources available to them? Do they know how to spot problems early? Are they encouraged to seek help? Is their environment one that's willing to help them overcome and admit struggles? Resources written and digital must be made readily available in as many spaces as possible. The coaches and staff must also be continually educated on mental health issues. One of the main hindrances that we've discussed so far as a barrier to overcome is money. The NCAA created $1 billion of revenue in 2019. Even with all this cash, there wasn't any indication that any went to addressing the mental health problems we've discussed. The NCAA's mission of protecting student athletes requires them to invest in helping student athletes not just with their physical health, but with their mental health as well. Because if they won't do it, who can? In 1905, President Theodore Roosevelt essentially saved college football. After a rash of on-the-field deaths, he called 2 meetings of university presidents regarding making the games safer. Ultimately, the NCAA grew out of these meetings. So government intervention has happened before, and I think it can and should happen again. After all, they've stepped in with regard to concussion protocols, so why not mental health? Precedent shows us that the federal government can and has stepped in to enforce rules before. For instance, Title IX laws and ADA regulations have had a great impact on many NCAA institutions. Simply put, the NCAA can't wait around for another Tyler Helinski. Action must be taken now. Mark Helinski, Tyler's dad, told Sports Illustrated that the reality is we missed it and we let him down. If the NCAA is as serious about mental health issues as they say they are, then it's time for them to put their money where their mouth is, whether they fund it themselves or federal laws are enacted. For now, I guess you could say that the ball is in their court.